Lobby group Human Rights Watch has released a video showing Democratic Army units supporting militia group members of the Nduma Defense of Congo-Rénové NDC-R abusing civilians. The group is a faction of the Nduma Defense of Congo-Rénové, which until its split in July 2020 controlled more territory than any other armed group in Eastern Congo. The following story contains some sensitive material, so viewer discretion is advised.
The organization says it has analyzed and authenticated footage filmed by local residents with undisclosed cameras showing abuses by NDC-R fighters and evidence of collaboration between the Congolese army and the fighters. Congolese authorities issued a warrant of arrest for the group's leader, Guidon Shimire Muisa, in June last year. He is accused of participating in an insurrection, recruiting child soldiers, and committing the crime against humanity of rape in Eastern DRC. He commands a faction of the NDC-R, which until its split in July of 2020, controlled more territory than any other armed group in Eastern DRC. It was effectively in administrative control of much of Walikale, Lubero, Masisi and Rutshuru territories in North Kivu, an area roughly the size of neighboring Rwanda. Since 2014, NDC-R forces have killed dozens of men, women and children in those four territories, many of them hacked to death with machetes or shot. The rights group says it has not been able to identify any attempt by Congolese authorities to arrest Guidon. It says instead there is evidence that elements of the Congolese army have been collaborating with the militia group.
All right, for more on this, we've asked Human Rights Watch Democratic Republic of Congo senior researcher Thomas Fessy to join us to give us some insights. Thomas, thanks so much indeed for joining us. Good to have you on the program. The DRC has always been a complex country, particularly on the eastern side. But it does boggle the mind that a warrant has been issued for some of these warlords and seemingly the authorities are not doing anything about it.
Yes, exactly, and this is no surprise in Congo. Unfortunately, it's happened before, and so the arrest warrant was issued in June last year. Our research is showing that even since then, the NDC-R was able to continue to carry out many abuses, including killings, rapes, extortion, and so on, without the opposition from the Congolese army. Instead of that, some of the Congolese army units were actually collaborating with the group, providing the group with weapons and ammunition, and using the group as a proxy in their military operations against other militia. So if you will, the Congolese military was involved in the planification of military operations with Guidon's rebel group, putting them on the front line against other militia groups in Eastern Congo, and to that effect they were supporting them with the necessary weapons and ammunition. So the rebel group of Guidon really became a sort of key partner of the Congolese army over the years, not only after the arrest warrant was issued, but the many years before.
And yet he's allowed to carry out these atrocities that you've described. How have the authorities explained this?
So in July, as you rightly said in your reports, the NDC-R actually split in two factions. There's Guidon on one side and his deputy commanders, or shall we say former deputy commanders now, broke away from him and are now commanding a rival faction, and there's an open conflict between those two factions. And we are already getting reports that in that open war between those two factions, we are getting credible information, if you will, that some Congolese army units are actually collaborating now with Guidon's rival faction against him, and that they are seeking to either neutralize him or to arrest him. So when we spoke to the Congolese army spokespersons, he told me that they were actively seeking to arrest Guidon, that they had been launching military operations against the group. But the information that we are getting, if confirmed, will show that it might just be a shift of alliances rather than a pure decision to arrest a rebel leader. Because obviously, the arrest warrant was issued against Guidon because he's implicated in so many abuses. But his deputy commanders are equally implicated in those serious crimes. And so obviously it's not because there is no arrest warrant against them that these rebel commanders shouldn't be apprehended, arrested, and brought to justice as well.
I mean, if it's known that the Congolese army and parts of it are collaborating with some of the factions there within these rebel groups, is there any indication that some kind of investigation is going to be done on the Congolese collaborators?
That is certainly our hope, and the hope of the many victims of the NDC-R rebel group. A huge issue in Eastern Congo is the impunity that and so decade after decade, year after year, you have new cycles of violence, new rebel groups popping up, alliances shifting, but there is no accountability at all, and the impunity continues. And that impunity actually gives rebel leaders a sort of green card to continue, the atrocities that they are committing on a daily basis in those regions. So until there is proper accountability and a proper commitment to end impunity for those responsible for those serious crimes, violence is just going to continue on.
What is life like for the civilians on the ground, who some of them bravely are filming some of these atrocities?
Well, Guidon's forces were, as you again said in your report, controlling for the split in July a huge territory, roughly the size of neighboring Rwanda. So that gives you an idea of how big the territory is. And over the years managed to impose a sophisticated governance structure with an illegal taxation system, for example. So people had to pay illegal taxes to the group, and if they didn't comply, they would be punished, they would be detained and beaten. We documented the case, for example, of a couple in April 2019, last year, that couldn't pay the tax 1 month, and they were detained in an underground pit. And after the man was actually able to pay a ransom, he was freed, but he didn't have enough money to pay for his wife and the baby that she was carrying on her back. And so they remained detained a few more days. And a few days later, the husband heard that some civilians had been killed in the exact position of the rebel forces where he was held. And when he went there, he found his wife and their one-year-old baby lying dead. They had been killed. And on the same day, 3 other women were found to have been killed by the rebel forces as well. So that's just an example to show you the terror under which those civilians have been living, not only having to give part of their livelihoods to those rebel forces, but also having to endure incredibly terrifying abuses, and not to mention the many rapes that have been committed against women and girls in those years as well.
Again, you know, one keeps looking to Kinshasa, and the president must know that this is going on. How does he address it to the country about what's being done to protect these citizens?
Well, President Tshisekedi in Kinshasa continues to say that, bringing peace to Eastern Congo remains his priority. In reality, the military strategy has not achieved much in the last few years, and before he came into power, the situation was already disastrous, and it hasn't really changed. Whether it is in North Kivu, the parts of Eastern Congo where the NDC-R has been active, or whether it is further north in Ituri, for example, or in around Beni, the situation is no better, and attacks are relentless. There are killings every week of civilians, and the army is not able to put an end to this violence. So I think that there is, at some point, there will be, much needed political commitment to actually end this violence and see that it's not just a military strategy that should be on the table to end what's going on. But also, again, in order to put an end to this impunity, I think the Congolese presidency has to understand that all those top commanders in the army that have proved to be abusive officers over the years have no place whatsoever in the military, because that's just showing that the Congolese army will not be able to professionally put an end to rebel activity in the East.
Let's talk a little bit about Guidon himself. Just how influential is he? You've described this faction breakaway, his underlings, former underlings that have formed their own faction. If he's arrested, is that the end of the problem, or are there many waiting to take up his position?
I think that's a very good question, and it's a key problem to address, because as you said, the NDC-R, Guidon is now at war with rival commanders. But if it turns out that the Congolese army units that were backing Guidon over the last few years are now backing his rivals, these guys are still, rebel leaders, and they are still, heavily implicated in all the abuses that we've documented at the time of our research. So, it's not because Guidon might get arrested at some point, we obviously this will be end of the story and end of the violence and end of the extortion of people in that area, until the entire group is actually dismantled and all the commanders are arrested and probably to the situation there. As far as Guidon is concerned, he was very influential over the last few years. Mind you that he set up his NDC-R group in 2014, years after he was already part of a rebel group, and himself was the deputy commander at the time in 2007 onwards, and in 2014 broke away from his rebel group to create his own one. And his former rebel leader has since been arrested. He's taken to a military tribunal in Eastern Congo, and he's now waiting. So that just goes to say that alliances keep shifting, but the problem remains because a rebel leader might be arrested, but then another one is propped up, and Congolese army units continue to use them as proxy forces in their fight against other militia. And obviously those Congolese senior army officers are benefiting from the access that the rebel group is able to give them to the mining sites and the illegal trade of gold and minerals that they obviously control there. So it's all intertwined, and you have a lot of ingredients showing that the arrest of Guidon will not be marking the end of those abuses and a return to normal life for the many civilians who've been suffering far too long.
All right, and I keep on saying, very complex part of the country. A few weeks ago, you hear about peace agreements being signed with some rebels in the region. One gets a sense that to solve this whole problem, it's going to have to take a regional effort, neighboring countries together with the DRC to try and actually manage this.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what's going on, but I can see that you are talking to me, but I can't hear you anymore.
Right. Can you hear me now?
I'm really sorry about that.
Can you hear me now, Thomas? All right, okay. Looks like we've lost Thomas Fessy, trying to explain to us the situation in the east of the DRC. Very complex, as you've heard there. One rebel leader, Guidon, who's had an arrest warrant for just about a year now, not being delivered, as it were. And part of that problem, it seems, is that there are collaborators within the DRC army that perhaps are propping him up. And it could be that breakaway factions from his rebel group also fighting him. So we'll continue to monitor that story and continue to get updates from people like Thomas Fessy, who's the country senior leader for Human Rights Watch, talking to us there from the DRC.